Hello, Science 9. Today we are going to be looking at the topic of unit conversion. And what we're talking about when we're looking at unit conversion is if I said to you that you had 100 centimeters, how many meters is that? I hope most of you know that 100 centimeters is 1 meter. If you don't, go and look at a ruler stick the next time you're in school, which might be September, but go and look at a meter stick. There are 100 centimeters in that 1 meter. Now, what if I said to you, you have 150 centimeters? Would you be able to tell me how many meters we have? Hopefully that would also be easy. It would be 1.5 meters. Now, these are things we can do in our head because a conversion of 100 to 1 is pretty straightforward. Things get more complicated when we have inches and feet, where the conversion is there are 12 inches per 1 foot. And so what I'm going to do today is show you a method that allows us to do this conversion even when the numbers are a little more complicated and not as intuitive. So for example, this method that we're using, it is called dimensional analysis, which is just really a big fancy way of saying unit conversion. It is a special method of unit conversion. Okay, so let's take our first example here, and let's say that I wanted to convert 100 centimeters, and I wanted to figure out how many meters is that. Okay, so what I would do is I would say I have 100 centimeters, and I know that there is 1 meter for every 100 centimeters. These two things here are equal to one another. Okay, those two things are equal to one another. Now, if two things are equal to one another, 1 meter is equal to 100 centimeters. Those are the same, right? Now, if I was to say 3 is equal to 3, that would be a pretty obvious statement, yes? These two things are equal to each other. What if I take then 3 and I divide by 3? What number do I get? I get the number 1. What do I get if I take 1 meter over 100 centimeters? What do I get? This is a little counterintuitive because it looks like it's 1 over 100, but remember these two things are equal. You couldn't actually do this division because the units are different. Okay, and so what you end up actually here is you end up with the number 1 because you have something that is the same over something that is the same. You have two things that are equal. If you divide them, that equals 1. If you have 1 meter over 100 centimeters, that equals 1. What the heck, you might say? Well, remember, 1 meter is 100 centimeters, right? And so if I put 100 centimeters, which is 1 meter over 100 centimeters, guess what? I get 1. And so the nice thing about this is if I have here the number 1, then if I take this number and I multiply it by 1, I'm going to end up with something that is equal. Okay? And in this case, all I have done is changed the units. So I am changing from centimeters into my final unit of meters. So my centimeters are going to cancel because I have 1 on the top and 1 on the bottom. And remember, anything that's on the top, and if there's something on the bottom, it will cancel out. Okay, so what we'll end up with then is 100 divided by 100. So my hundreds cancel out, and I end up with 1 meter. Gosh, Ms. Spence, that looks really complicated. And it was much easier just to say 100 centimeters is equal to 1 meter. Well, what if I was to ask you something like this? Okay, so for example, what if we had how many inches is 2.0 yards. And I bet you don't know yard conversions. I certainly didn't before I started teaching unit conversion. 1 yard is equal to 36 inches. Okay, that is something that we know. Okay, I know that these two things are equal. Okay, so if I was to write 1 yard over 36 inches, what would that actually be equal to? Remember, 1 yard, let's call that A, is equal to 36 inches, let's call that A. A will cancel with A and it will leave you with 1. And so if I was to take 2.0 yards and multiply it by the number 1, I would end up with something that is equal to 2.0 yards. Okay. Now, this doodad here, where we take two things that are equal and we write them one on top of another in fraction form, that is called a conversion factor. Conversion factor, because we use it to convert from one unit to another. And actually, a conversion factor can be written two ways. You can write it right side up, 1 yard over 36 inches, or you can write it upside down, 36 inches over 1 yard. And we are going to look and see which one will work better for our question. So I've just made it a little smaller so we can see everything. And I want to know how many inches is equal to 2 yards. Well, remember, I can multiply this by one of these two conversion factors. Okay, this is conversion factor A, this is conversion factor, I'll just call it CF for conversion factor B. And what I want to happen is I want for my units to end up in the end, I don't want to have yards anymore, I want to have inches. So over here I want to have inches. And you'll notice that I've written a line here. That's not just a blank, that's a division line. That is so I can write one of my two conversion factors. Where would I like to have my yards, because one of the two units is yards, where would I like to have yards so it will cancel out? Remember, I could write 2.0 yards as 2.0 yards over 1. So 2.0 yards is in the numerator, it's on the top. Where will I want yards so that it will cancel out? Do I want it on the top, yards, or do I want it on the bottom, yards? Hopefully, you see that yards is what we're going to want on the bottom of that. Okay, and I know that 1 yard is equal to 36 inches. Okay, so anytime I write a conversion factor, the two things, the one on the top and the one on the bottom, have to be equal to each other. Okay, and so at that point I can say I have yards on the top, I have yards on the bottom. Those will cancel each other out, and I am left with 2.0 times 36, which gives me 72, and the only unit I have left is inches. And because this conversion factor conversion factor is really equal to 1, okay, remember that 36 inches is equal to 1 yard. So if I was to write 36 inches over 1 yard, that would be the same as writing 36 inches over 36 inches because 36 inches is 1 yard. I could also write it as 1 yard is equal to 1 yard. Yeah, because 36 inches is equal to 1 yard. All three of those are equal. And because 1 over 1 is equal to 1, and 36 over 36 is equal to 1, well, and there we are. So that means that this conversion factor must also be equal to 1. And so this half of the equal sign is going to be equal to this half of the equal sign because 2 yards times 1 is going to equal a quantity that is equal to 2 yards. Okay? All right. You actually don't need to worry about this business about it equaling 1. If you're finding that confusing, at this point you can say, okay, Miss Spence, I don't want to know about that. That just confuses me. We're going to do an example, and we're just going to ignore that fact that it equals 1, and you're just going to believe me that when you multiply by a conversion factor, the result will be equal to the original amount. Okay, so let's say, for example, we have how many feet is 35 yards? Well, in each of these questions that we've done up till this point, we have looked for a quantity that we want to find out about. Okay? How many feet? We have a question word here. How many is some question words? Question words. And when you have question words, that means that that is your unknown unit. So we are going to identify the unknown unit. Okay, and in this case, that is feet. We don't know how many feet. We are going to identify our initial quantity, and unit. Okay, and our initial quantity and unit will be given in the question. So what information is given in the question? Oh, look at that, 35 yards. So our initial quantity is 35 yards. Okay, and if we have our unknown, we have our initial quantity, then finally we also need, in order to solve this problem, we need a conversion factor. And I haven't told you the conversion factor yet, but in the question it should say how many feet is 35 yards, and I should be telling you that 1 yard is equal to 3 feet. Okay, there are 3 feet in 1 yard. Okay, so my conversion factor is that there are 3 feet per 1 yard. Okay, but I could also write that upside down. I could write that there's 1 yard is equal to 3 feet. There are 3 feet per 1 yard. There's 1 yard per 3 feet. So either of those is perfectly good. Okay, you can use the to convert, but you're only going to pick one of them to do your calculation. So let's take a look up here, just here, and I'm going to get rid of some of my little scribblies. Okay, There we go. Okay. And let's notice what we have here. In the previous question, we wanted to know how many inches. How many inches was our unknown? I'm just going to call that U, our unknown. Okay, so we had our unknown, and it was equal to 2 yards. 2 yards was the quantity we were given in the question. So that is our initial quantity. So I'm going to call that I for initial quantity. So we have our unknown is equal to our initial quantity, and then we multiplied it by 36 inches per yard. Remember, 36 inches per yard was our conversion factor. Okay, so our unknown was equal to an initial times a conversion factor, or U is equal to I times CF. Let's go back one more. Let's go back to our centimeters question. And again, I've made a huge mess, so let's get rid of some of that. Okay. Super exciting here. Okay. Okay. So we have what on earth did I write there? Okay. 1 meter. So we wanted to know how many meters there were. That was our unknown. And I was asking you, how many meters is 100 centimeters? How many meters is 100 centimeters? So my initial quantity that I'm starting with is 100 centimeters. So that was our initial quantity. And then what did I multiply it by to get my final answer? I multiplied it by one thing that was equal to another thing. And that is a, what do we call that? When I have one unit quantity equal to another unit quantity, that is a conversion factor. So our unknown is equal to an initial times a conversion factor. Look at our next example. Oh, our unknown was equal to an initial quantity times a conversion factor. So for all of these questions, we can solve them by identifying the unknown, the initial, and the conversion factor. And then step 2, we're going to set up an equation that looks like this. Unknown is equal to the initial quantity times the conversion factor. And of course, because I'm lazy, I am going to abbreviate that as the unknown is equal to the initial quantity times the conversion factor. So let's take a look at our information in this question. What was our unknown? Our unknown was how many, and we know it's our unknown because it's got those question words, how many feet? So our unknown, oh, I have it here. Our unknown was how many feet. So I'm going to say how many feet is equal to our initial quantity. That was 35 yards. That's our initial quantity, 35 yards. And now we're going to multiply it by a conversion factor. And you get to choose. Are we going to do it like this? 3 feet over 1 yard. Or are we going to do it like this? Our unknown number of feet is equal to our initial quantity, 35 yards, times a conversion factor. And in this case, we're going to use the second conversion factor. 1 yard is equal to 3 feet. So you get to ask yourself now, am I going to use equation A or am I going to use equation B? Pause the video and decide for yourself, are we going to use A or B? Okay. What we want to do is we want to end up with the unit feet. So I don't want yards, I want to have feet. So if I use this first one, I have yards on the top. And remember, if you don't actually see that that's on the top, you can always write yards as yards over 1. And now you can obviously see that yards are on the top and the 1 is on the bottom. So yards will cancel with yards because I have yards on the top, yards on the bottom, and the only unit I'm left with is feet. So 35 times 3 is 105 feet. And my units worked. What did I want? I wanted feet and I ended up with feet. What if I had used the other version of the conversion factor, yards over feet, 1 yard per 3 feet? What I would have gotten is, well, my yards wouldn't have canceled because they're both on the top. Remember, that's on the top. I would have had 35 divided by 3. I still would have ended up with 35 divided by 3 this time would be, if I calculate that out, that's 11.7. But my unit would be yards times yards. And when you have yards times yards, you end up with yards squared. Uh-oh. And then my feet is in the denominator, so it would be on the bottom. So my answer would be 11.7 yards squared per feet. Uh-oh. That looks really ugly. That's not what I wanted. I wanted to find feet, and I ended up with something completely different. So when you choose your conversion factor, choose the one that makes the units cancel out properly. Okay? And if you feel like you are good at this point to go try some examples, that's great. If you feel like you would like some more examples, I'm going to do another video that uses conversion factors in the context of electricity, and you might want to watch that one as well before you do this worksheet.